Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
Soybeans are found on dinner tables around the world. Some form of the soybean is found in baby foods, snacks, cooking oils, and many other food items eaten daily. And soybeans provide the protein in the diets for livestock and fish. The Nebraska soybean farmers support research to develop new soy-based products for foods, livestock, and industrial uses through their checkoff dollars. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Market Journal, television for making agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, Darin Newsom analyzes grain markets after the USDA's latest supply and demand estimates. Kate Brooks weighs profit margins for cattle and hog producers. Bryce Anderson gives options for seeding forage into wheat stubble. Rick Rasby discusses early weaning of calves. And Bryce Anderson talks about the weather outlook for the rest of summer. Darin Newsom from DTN is our marketing analyst this week. Corn and soybean markets saw favorable finishes Monday and Tuesday. Wednesday showed mixed results, and Thursday featured the USDA's latest supply and demand report. The agency estimates new crop corn ending stocks in the U.S. at just less than 1.96 billion bushels. It cut production by reducing harvested acreage by 400,000 acres, but leaving yield at 156.5 bushels an acre. The report projects an increase in new crop soybean ending stocks to 295 million bushels. U.S. 2013-2014 wheat production was slashed by 83 million bushels to 576 million bushels. We talked with Darin at DTN's offices in Omaha Thursday afternoon.
My initial reaction is I'm just glad they're over. During the quarters, at the end of the quarters, you usually get 3 reports in the span of 4 weeks, and we've just gone through that here this summer. And for all the nonsense that's attached to these reports, to all the hype that they bring, it's just nice to have them out of the way. Now we'll get back to trading weather. We'll get back to trading other things besides some what usually turns out to be fictitious numbers.
Let's start in corn and just talk about the overall supply. Do you think there's enough to go around before we get to the new crop?
Since we have no export demand at this time, we'll probably make it through. I know the market was counting on an early harvest, predominantly in the southeast. It's just simply not going to happen because of the spring and summer weather, regardless of what USDA has said in the past. Crop conditions are not some of the best that we've seen in years. So I think that we're going to be able to get through this market. I think we're going to be able to get through this marketing year, but supplies are going to be very tight. At least usable supplies are going to be very tight. And so I think we're going to continue to see a stronger basis. I think we're going to continue to see the cash market well supported.
You mentioned crop conditions. Corn and beans, what's your confidence level that this is going to be a big crop?
Well, I mean, it's going to be a big crop because we do have large acres. There's no getting around that. Now, we don't know how many were actually not planted. We're certainly not going to know that through any report. So we're going to have large crops. Will they be as large as what's being projected at this point? Possibly not. I still don't think, again, all the acres are being taken into account, and I don't know that yields are going to be quite as strong as what's being projected at this point.
Big enough that when someone says $3 corn, $4 corn, you feel okay with that?
No, I don't think we have. I don't think the ending stocks, the real ending stocks for 2013-14 are going to be to the point that's going to push us down into the $3 corn. Now, what could happen is if the investors all get up and leave, like we've seen here over the course of 2012-13, if that continues, then yes, we could get into the low 4s. But fundamentally, I don't think the rationale is there. I don't think it's there.
In August, we'll see the numbers from the resurvey on soybean acres in 14 states. What's your expectation?
I have none. I mean, these numbers could come in anywhere. Right now, if I look at what the market's telling me, they don't believe that the acres or the crop is there. I mean, we've only got a 4.5 cent carry between the November and the January contract. It's very small. That's indicating that the commercial side of the market's really concerned about supplies next year, really concerned about continued growth in demand. The bottom line is they think the situation's far tighter than what USDA is going to say, and so I don't really know what USDA is going to have in its August acreage number. I just know the market doesn't think it's enough yet.
Is there a recommendation on positioning yourself before or after, not touching it at all?
You know, right now we're kind of sitting back. We haven't done a lot of contracting. It looks like the market wants to try to put in its seasonal rally. We usually see the markets rally a little bit during the summer if we have any weather issues at all, and certainly we could. This is going to help push the market up. It's going to give us some better opportunities to go. Now, in front of the report, we'll have to kind of get whether the temperament of the market has changed a bit. Maybe then we start to put some more positions on. Right now, we're going to sit pretty open.
Based off all the things we've been talking about, the users and how much they need, how aggressive would you be if you still had some old crop corn left?
Old crop, I'd probably be a bit more aggressive. I do think the old crop market's going to stay well supported. The problem is both corn and soybeans have run so far here through the early part of summer. We've had very strong basis levels. We've actually started to see them weaken a little bit, national average on soybeans. So, if you've still got some sitting in demand, start feeding this market. It's what it's telling you it wants done. So, probably time to start feeding some of these old crop bushels, getting rid of them, starting to focus more on the new crop.
Even soybeans, or do you think that there could be a summer run in there?
I still think there could be a summer run because in both corn and beans, I want to sell a little bit at a time, but there's no way that we're still sitting really with 125 million bushels ending stocks, which is what was said in the July report. I think it's far tighter than that. We're probably well below 100 million bushels. We'll never see it officially, but I think that the stock situation is far tighter than what's being reported now. That's going to continue to support the cash market.
How do you look at 2013 pricing opportunities?
2013, I think we're going to have an opportunity again this summer. Again, as with corn, weather's going to be the key. I think we're going to move into a time frame now where we're focused on weather and we're not so worried about what the USDA is going to say every other week. So with that in mind, we don't have an ideal situation. We're still coming out of a spring and summer that were not ideal. So I think the new crop markets also have an opportunity to move a little bit here in the summer, possibly setting up some better, getting close to some of those highs that we saw earlier that would provide some selling opportunities.
Does anything in 2014 look beautiful to you?
Yeah, one thing we're going to want to get some 2014 on the books because in the long run, I still think the tops are in these markets. I think we established the highs in 2012. The whole structure of the market seems to be shifting, seems to be changing, not quite as bullish as it used to be. So we get another nice run in the 13-14 market, and it pulls the 14-15 new crops with it. I think we're going to want to take a look at getting some of that on the books as well.
I'll finish in wheat. What are you seeing the numbers that are coming in from the harvest right now?
Right now, the harvest numbers were actually a little better than anticipated, but out in the western southern plains, they're just deplorable. I mean, anything that wasn't irrigated barely had enough wheat to cut. So USDA kind of reflected that today. They did up the overall average yield a little bit. Some of that was due to the better than expected winter wheat, and also we had, a little bit better expectations with the spring wheat. So I think any rally that we see in the wheat market is certainly going to be muted by the fact that we're not in a tight supply and demand situation. But they did increase export demand, which certainly seems to go along with what we're seeing in the market right now. So if we can start upping demand a little bit, that could start to help wheat, at least give it a little bit of a push here this summer.
Where's the next volatility that comes in any of those three commodities? Is it a next USDA report? Is it weather?
No, weather. We're certainly in that time frame, but I think the kind of the unknown right now is what's going to go on with the dollar. We've seen the U.S. dollar index fall hard since the release of the June Fed meeting minutes, and that's on the idea that maybe we're not going to see these bumps in interest rates that had been anticipated just a month or so ago. That's really been pushing the dollar higher. So if the dollar starts to come down, we're going to start talking about inflation. We've already seen gold move. We've seen crude oil post an incredible rally here the last couple of weeks. Grains could follow, particularly those grains that still have some supply and demand issues, corn, soybeans to be in particular. So I think there's some opportunity here. So some of the volatility is going to come from outside sources.
Mike Briggs will join us next week to look at cattle markets. The House of Representatives narrowly passed a split version of the Farm Bill Thursday. In a final vote of 216 to 208, all but 12 Republicans voted for the measure, with all 196 Democrats voting against it. This version doesn't include nutrition programs, but House leaders say they'll try to push through that portion in a separate bill. The House and Senate will now meet to negotiate. Updating a story from last week, there are now 16 states positive for the porcine epidemic diarrhea virus. Over the last sample week, there were 19 new case additions. Texas is the latest state to be added. The latest Sterling Beef Profit Tracker shows more bad news in the feedlot. For the week ending July 6th, the average loss was nearly $195 a head. That's $32 worse than last week and $13 under last year at this time. Packers managed to increase their profit margins, making more than $83 per animal. Kate Brooks joined us Wednesday to look at livestock markets and how a recent fed cattle run might help producers ease losses.
That fed cattle, they're starting to see some run-ups. You know, we've seen some declining input prices. We have that shorter supply. Those feedlots are still trying to put as many cattle as they can into those feedlots.
How dark is it right now for those feedlots? The Packers are still doing well, right?
The Packers are still doing well. You know, they're taking some of that margin there. The feedlots are still seeing those declining margins. Haven't seen much improvement. We haven't seen enough increases in input prices and enough in the live cattle prices to, you know, help the feedlots out.
Seasonality, are we totally different than what you would normally expect for this time of year?
We're still seeing that usual decline in prices through the year. Hopefully, you know, as we get into the fourth quarter, you know, later in the fall, start to see those prices go up again. And a lot of that's going to be driven by those wholesale prices. We're starting to maybe see a bottoming in the wholesale prices. And if we can start to see those increase, maybe start to see some of these other prices start to go up.
The wholesale decrease would mean what for perhaps a consumer?
You know, the wholesale price, if we talk about the cutout price, that leads into retail prices, but most of those prices go, you know, we've seen those increases in the retail sector over time, and we're probably not going to see big declines, you know, as we move forward.
Production-wise, what are we seeing in numbers when you look at total cattle?
If we look at total production, beef production, we've seen an increase in the last, you know, this year over last year. If we look at where our beef production comes from, we've got two sectors basically. So we have the cow and bull sector, which is basically our hamburger products. And then you have the heifers and steers that becomes more of your higher quality cuts, your export products. If we look at those two sectors, the cow slaughter sector, we saw, you know, January, February numbers, we actually were slaughtering less than we were a year ago. But as we hit March, because of the extended weather, forage conditions, pasture conditions, we actually saw an increase in slaughter above last year through March. That's caused us to be about 3.4% higher in cow slaughter over last year. So that's kind of offsetting some of our, you know, beef production declines in the heifer and slaughter. But we are still seeing, you know, maybe some more placements of heifers in feed yards as we continue to move forward. Probably seeing more of a decline, you know, maybe again in our herds and not a rebuilding like we had initially hoped for.
What do you expect to see in that next cattle on feed report?
You know, again, placements probably still somewhat declining just because of normal declines in overall herds.
Any action in the live market?
There's not. You know, the last couple weeks into the first of this week, you know, it's continued to see not a lot of activity going on. We did make some sales, I think, in the Southern Plains, about $119 per hundredweight on the live. Here in Nebraska, it was about $120, but it's still, we're on very light demand. The packers just aren't demanding that product right now.
If you look in the moving over to swine, if you look in the pork sector, they're doing quite well right now. Why?
Pork continues to, you know, keep increasing. You know, they're seeing good margins. You know, that input prices, you know, they've been able to do, and you know, just the pork industry itself continues to see some improvements as they move forward.
The next cattle on feed report is scheduled for release Friday the 19th at 2 p.m. Nebraska's wheat growers have harvested 12% of their crop. That's behind the 5-year average of 27% and well behind last year's pace of 90% completion. Farmers with that now open land may opt to put something different in the ground like alfalfa, turnips, summer annual grasses, or other cover crops. UNL Extension forage specialist Bryce Anderson says there are steps you can take to give those next plants a better chance at thriving.
I think the things that we want to do in order to avoid having problems with getting good stands from these forages is particularly take a look at how we're handling all the residue that's out behind that wheat. You know, sometimes we don't have very good straw choppers or even have real good straw choppers behind the combine. We get a lot of straw back there, and this straw can cause some problems getting the drill to either cut through it, or sometimes the straw may even smother new seedlings that are trying to come up. So one of the things that's probably the best to do with that residue is bale it. You know, straw's got quite a bit of value these days, especially as we get in the western part of the state, so that can be one good way to remove the residue and get some additional income. But even if you don't bale it, make sure that you get it spread out real well, and then use a good drill. Don't take shortcuts on the drill. We want to make sure we have something that can place that seed down just a little bit into the soil, and give it a little bit of soil coverage, but not bury that seed so deeply that it won't be able to push up through the soil. So watching that residue and using good equipment are probably the two keys, and then watch for weeds. If you got weeds right away, spray them out. If not, have some post-emerge herbicides ready, especially for volunteer wheat later on. That might cause some problems.
Bruce says no-till planting of forages and other cover crops into wheat stubble can conserve soil moisture, reduce erosion, and diminish tillage expenses. The July Nebraska farmer says there are plenty of hazards on the farm you and your family need to consider. Working near power lines is one danger, and the article in this issue lists 5 safety tips to avoid contact with lines. It includes the increased height of today's equipment and radio antennas that extend from the cab or 15 feet or more above the ground. The July edition of the Nebraska Farmer says you should make a safety plan for your farm and include ways to avoid electrical hazards. As of the latest state report, 38% of Nebraska's pasture and rangeland was rated as poor or very poor. That's certainly not ideal, but it's much better than where we were at this time last year, when nearly 60% was rated in those worst 2 categories. But with summer heat, missing precipitation could drag grasses into rougher shape and force producers to make management decisions. Rick Rasby joined us in the R.B. Warren Arena this week to discuss early weaning calves and if 2013 is putting farmers and ranchers into last year's situation of surviving until fall corn stalks become available.
Well, you know, I tell you what, it depends on what end of the state you're on. Boy, if you're on the eastern end of the state, boy, you know, we've received timely rains and pastures really look pretty good. But as you move further west, boy, the pastures look a lot more challenged at this time of year, especially due to the fact we haven't had any rain out there.
If you were to think about early weaning, then you'd have to take it on a case-by-case basis. How would you evaluate your pasture?
You really would, yeah. You know, take a look at, a lot of times the amount of moisture that we receive, you know, in April and May will dictate the amount of grass production that we have later on in the year. And so a lot of folks have already done that, and those assessments probably have been made. But some folks have assessed that they aren't going to have enough grass to carry all their pairs through the summer. And so right now they're really thinking about early weaning and probably a good management strategy.
What are the things that they need to keep in mind when they do that? Maybe some easy things right away.
Yeah, you know, the thing that I would think about first is, man, are the calves old enough to really early wean successfully? And you can actually early wean calves at a fairly young age. But if you think about it, if you had your last calf, or not you, but if your cows had their last calf May 1, you know, August 1, they're going to be about 90 days of age. And so that would be a good time to if you're going to early wean, that would be an okay kind of an age to early wean at. Youngest calf being about 90 days post-calving. The other thing is that when you think about early weaning, and if you're going to keep those calves on your location, you've really got to have a high-quality diet for them to make sure that they continue to move, you know, continue to grow. And right now on the cow, they'll probably be growing about 2 pounds per head per day. So you need to develop a nice high-quality diet to meet that kind of growth rate.
What about in conditions where it's not necessarily all or none? You know, if you're only going to wean a few.
Yeah, you know, I've gotten that question a number of times, and they've gone out and evaluated their pastures, and they've said, well, you know, I've got enough grass to get part of my pairs all the way to whatever kind of fall-winter feeding program that I might have. And so when you think about that kind of a thing, you might think about some strategic early weaning, if you will. And the ones that I would have you think about, if you can do that, have to do that, young cows would be the ones that you'd want to wean those calves off of. At least go out and take a look at the first and second calvers. They're the ones that are probably most compromised in these kinds of conditions. And so if you're going to think about strategic in regards to early weaning, had enough grass to get some pairs through the summer, not all of them, I'd probably go out and take a look at early weaning the young cows.
Are we in a position where we need to think about culling again this year, or is that an individual basis as well?
I tell you what, we've gone pretty deep the last year and a half or so, and so the thing would be is that you wouldn't want to carry in kind of open cows any further than you needed to, and so if you're 40 days post breeding season, which probably aren't quite there yet for most spring calving herds, preg checking as early as possible to make sure that you're not feeding expensive feed into females that don't have a calf, and probably would be a good management strategy. But I probably wouldn't think about preg checking those, or at least moving those cattle, gathering those cattle probably until 35, 40 days after you've pulled the bulls.
I don't know what you've seen, but traveling north last weekend, I saw a lot of pastures that were already cut for the grass and then baled up. Is that something that you think might be an option to do if you haven't done it yet and have that grass available?
The thing is that in some areas there's really quite a bit of grass out there, and so the idea of being able to harvest that grass, put it up as a bale, and then have it available to feed later on in the fall and winter would be a good option. The other thing is that if you graze some that grass, sometimes you get a lot of trampling going on in there, and so if you're going to be short on pasture and you don't want to go ahead and put the cows out there, let them trample maybe half of it in, putting it up as hay might be a good option.
The latest UNL drought monitor shows drought conditions slightly creeping back in Nebraska. Last week's monitor showed 8% of the state was in no classification of drought. This week's only puts 6.5% in no drought. The increase comes from the least severe form of D0 or abnormally dry status. Al Dutcher is off this week. In place of his regular weather outlook, we spoke with DTN senior ag meteorologist Bryce Anderson to get his thoughts on how the rest of the growing season will play out. As we take a look at the weather over the summer, let's just step back to where we are right now and kind of give me a comparison year over year of where we are this year compared to where we were at this time last year.
Well, Jeff, there almost is, in some respects, there's no comparison between this year and last year over most of the central part of the country, because a year ago we had level 3 to level 4 drought in effect, pretty much from the interior west all the way practically to the Appalachians. Not quite that extensive, but it was pretty close. You had level 4 drought in Indiana and southern Illinois, for example. This year, from the Missouri River east, the indications are that no drought is in effect. There's been a tremendous round of precipitation, be it in the form of rain or snow, as we know. And we think about Nebraska, and there still is a fair amount of both short and long-term drought, basically in the western half of the state. The eastern half of the state, we have mostly long-term drought, and then in the southeast, drought-free. So there overall has been a big improvement in that respect.
Any specific reason why that Missouri River line is kind of the line to go from east to west?
Well, I think what we have seen is the storm tracks that formed over the past several months did take a track that favored the western 2/3 of the Midwest. But then also, we know that Nebraska had historic drought last year, and it simply takes an awful lot of moisture just to bring things back. And I think that's the reason why we still have got a real stubborn, longer-term drought situation going on over the eastern half of the state.
Perhaps the people that caught a few rains were maybe thinking that the drought was easing, but now after a few weeks of not getting anything, the leaves are starting to curl in some areas. So as you look at next week, perhaps, we've caught some heat this week, especially one day. What does it look like in terms of temperature next week?
Temperatures are going to be a little bit on the hot side to begin next week, but then we will see some moderation as we go through the week. It doesn't look like we're going to have just a constant round of real hot conditions. But we still are looking for values to be near to above normal. So I would not be surprised that we kind of stay in that low 90s type bracket on the temperatures. And that is going to draw out soil moisture. There's no doubt about that.
Any chance for precipitation next week?
I think there's going to be over the eastern portion of the state, especially, let's say from Grand Island on east. We see that we see on the charts that some upper level low pressure may form that actually tracks out of places like Missouri westward instead of low pressure forming and working east. It's kind of a little atmospheric twist that's happening, and that could drag some showers into the eastern portion of the state, east central Nebraska, and then into eastern Nebraska.
What's the longer term outlook as we get towards the pollination in both crops? Anything that looks to be of major help coming along the way?
We're going to need, I think, first of all the irrigation we can muster. We know that irrigation systems didn't have to start up quite as early as they did last year, but I think we're going to see those pivots working quite a bit as we go through the balance of July and on into August. Rainfall, I think, is going to be scattered. We're looking at basically, around normal for rainfall, but considering that there are some deficits, that really doesn't help out when we're in a high evapotranspiration phase like we are.
Does the same go as you get to the western half of Nebraska where they're really dry, and they were in it before the eastern half was last year?
They were, and they still are, and I am afraid that in the western part of the state, it still is going to be fairly difficult to bring in some rainfall. Now, we have seen some monsoonal shower formation during this past week. Some of that was because of a tropical storm off of Baja California that supplied some moisture into the upper atmosphere over the western part of the state. And so we might see that, but those monsoonal showers tend to be very spotty and really not the kind of substantial rains that we need. So it still is going to be difficult to really ease that drought pattern.
Has this year, or this summer at least, gone kind of how you thought it was based off of the La Nina year last year?
Yes, it has, and the reason I say that is that we felt that the Pacific was starting to go back into a neutral phase, and that's where it is now. We also felt like things were going to be more favorable over the eastern part of the Midwest this year, still with some challenges here in the western Corn Belt, and I think that's the way the pattern is starting to play out.
Al will return with his normal forecast next week. Today's interviews with Darin Newsom, Kate Brooks, Rick Rasby, and Bryce Anderson are available individually on the Market Journal website and mobile app as part of the July 12th episode. Next week, Mike Briggs will be our marketing analyst, and Tamara Jackson-Zims will discuss Goss's wilt and foliar fungicide application in corn. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
Whether it's spring planting, fall harvesting, or just a drive across the state, soy biodiesel helps a diesel-powered engine operate in a demanding job. Soybean oil from Nebraska soybeans makes biodiesel a renewable fuel that's also environmentally responsible. The Soybean Checkoff plays a major role in supporting the use and availability of biodiesel. The Nebraska Soybean Board, growing opportunity from the ground up.